Yo, this is Heist. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be going over my track Misery Guts, which is forthcoming on my new album Iacon, out in May. So we're going over a track I've made today for my forthcoming album. No one's heard this yet, so this is part of a set of tracks, and I just picked this one today because I thought it's quite kind of, you know, got quite a lot of interesting stuff going on in the processing. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm just going to play you a little bit of the intro first. So basically that was just a vibe I was sort of going for, like a, it's almost like a cinematic feel to it, like not super complicated but just warm, and had a tension about it. So I'm going to go and show you what I did. This is the intro stems folder. All the different sources are in this folder for the intro, and I believe it was Massive. Yes. So Massive is basically creating that atmosphere there all on its own. Nothing else is really being worked in yet except for a little hi-hat. Just for the DJ really. I always like to keep it quite minimal but still mixable with some sort of element that lets the DJ mix it. Some people would disagree with that, but like as a DJ myself and as a DJ before even a producer, I've always kind of remembered that. So if we take a look at this, it's called Fizzy Highs. So that's still on the keys there. All it really is, it's just a simple Massive preset with using really basic algorithms for the wave table. It's just a square saw and a square saw 2 on the one below it. So that's the two oscillators, and then you know you're using filters. If I turn the filter off here, it's actually even more fizzy. So you know, that DARF filter there is just literally just dampening the top end harmonics. And I'm using no, that's not doing anything. Then it's just really about effects over here. If I turn all of those off, you see how it's just sort of dead really and just dry. That's mainly to do with the reverb and the delay. So the delay's on first, and that's actually doing a left and right independent delay. That's why it's called a sync delay, because it does a left and a right independently as an echo. So as I've put that on, it's actually doing 1/4 and 1/8. So that's quite a kind of nice cohesive number arrangement there for me. It always seems to just, you know, without it, it's completely dead. And then add to that a reverb, which just sets it in that space a little bit even more. And yeah, finally at the end, just some EQ, not really doing much, just a little bit of mid-range sort of, I don't even know if it's mid-range, maybe high-mid sort of boost there, but nothing big on there really. I can just about hear it, but it's really subtle. So basically that sound is what forms the tension, if you will, for this intro. Now on that sound I did put a few plugins, I can see them coming up. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn them all off and see. Let's actually get this a little bit bigger so everyone can see which one it is. Okay, let's just turn those plugins off and have a listen to that. Right, notice straight away how thin it is and kind of just, it's a little bit bland. And as soon as I put that processing back on, it just really brings the richness in, which is what it seemed to be lacking when I first got it. So let's just go through. I'll turn them all off. I'm going to turn the EQs off as well. The EQ, just to let you know, was a low shelf at about 100 hertz, 107 hertz I think that is. And I was just doing a subtle kind of boost with that, because I find with low shelving sometimes, you know, just trying a little bit of it to see if it does just make it a little bit richer can be a nice indication of if that's the direction you need to go with the process. For me, I just put that in. And I can see in the analyzer in here that it's just very subtly taken up the warmth a bit. So I went and had more processing. This is another delay that I'm using, but I think this is being automated. So this is probably not doing anything. No, this is not actually doing anything to the sound as we hear it at the moment. You can see that because the mix is turned all the way to 0. So as it goes further in the track, if I show you here, look, this is the automation that's controlling that mix. So yeah, that will come into it later on. We'll talk about that in a bit. What else have we got on there? Okay, so I'm using this as also for automation. So I guess from this, what I'm trying to show you is I will use different plugins that are there to shape the sound at a certain time in the arrangement. And that filter is doing a similar thing. At the moment, you can see that the cutoff is completely down, so it's not actually doing anything. But that will lift up later on in the track. If I show you, it's over here. There you go. At the moment, it's bypassed. Let's just go and unbypass it in here. There you go, so you can hear there the way it kind of takes the massive sound just up into the, it's almost like a riser sound, but a riser sound usually has a pitch about it. This isn't a pitch, this is just a high pass, giving you that feeling of going up. And that's just simple automation. You can do that in any DAW. It's not applicable to any DAW at all. Just go and use whatever appliance you need to achieve that, basically. Also on there, this is still not anything that's actually done anything to the sound apart from at certain times that we've looked at. So LFO tool, now this will be doing something. LFO tool is really clever. I've mentioned it before in videos. If you've watched, I think it was the Metalheads video I did for Steinberg, then I did it in there. And what I'm doing is similar kind of thing again. I'm controlling the volume amplitude. That is all I'm doing. It's very similar to side chaining. And for me, I find it really kind of nice and musical. Like there's no complicated setting up of sends or anything like what you get with some side change examples, which is a little bit of a messes with your mind a bit. But with this plugin, if I put that on, you can hear already it's just straight away doing that movement. So where you can see that there is black, it has basically got the sound down, and when it is up, that is when you're getting the fullness of the full sound. And you can adjust this. Yeah, so LFO tool on there, just doing that little bit of movement to give the sound a kind of different dimension, I guess. Then we've got another plugin, which I've just used to, again, plugin actually, but it's not actually doing anything at the moment. Again, this is another automated plugin that will probably do something on one of these lanes that you can see I'm hovering over here. So let's just have a little look. Yes, and still not actually doing anything. So yeah, that is, not sure what that's doing. It must be somewhere in the track somewhere, otherwise I wouldn't have left it on there. And then there's one final thing on there, and this is quite important. This is definitely to do with the processing of the sound. I love this plugin. It's now going to be revealed to you. It's the UAD Voice of God, otherwise known as VOG. Little Labs, absolutely amazing plugin. What it does is it's basically a low end for bass and stuff, and low end frequencies in texture. I tend to find it will really give you an almost analog feel, like it's been recorded from an analog source. It's the only way I can really describe it, and I haven't got another plugin. You know, I teach a lot of people music, and a lot of people are like, oh, I haven't got UAD, where can I get that kind of similar kind of effect? And the simple fact is I don't know of one that you can, not like this. It works really well. So I put that on. Let's just turn it off. For me, it's night and day. It's literally an extra 20% of the sound now is being created just warmer because of this one process at the end. And that's why when I go and turn them all off, you can hear it now. Although some of those things aren't constantly changing the sound, they are in there doing their thing at certain times, the other effects are changing the sound and making it better. So that's the intro. That's quite a lot of processing for me on a sound as well. A lot of the time I won't quite go to the depth of that, but yeah, as I said, it's not all constantly doing it at the same time. So from that, I just let that be for a second. A little sound, little incidental, and in this track there is literally, I don't know how many, but a lot of incidentals as detail. For me, when I'm writing and trying to keep myself interested and not let any of the holes just go past me, and by holes I mean parts of the track where just need that little sound just to fill the space, so that it's not so empty. And I was told by someone the other day that they really admire me for that, because I put a lot of detail into those sounds, and you'll only hear them once or twice in the arrangement, but they fill that certain gap. So that was one of those sounds just there, and it was actually it's actually made him massive as well. I'm a big massive user, yeah, definitely. Even though there has been other synths like Serum and various others that I've got, and even my hardware synths, you know, I love using massive just because there's a certain workflow I have with it that gets a result. Yeah, there you go. There's the little kind of bass sound that I used. It was only used very kind of briefly, as well as literally like a one shot, just in there, just to fill a space really. And also just then there was like a little reverse. I don't know if you heard that. There was like a little reverse sound. What I actually need to do is undo all of the groups so I can see I'm not missing anything. Okay, so we've got drums down here, and you'll notice, see now the track is actually, didn't look like there was very much there to start with, but now I've actually unlocked all the folders. We can see there's quite a bit of stuff there. So I was looking for that little sound. There it is. So it's just a little hi-hat reversed, I believe. Don't think there's any processing. And if it will let me play it. Yeah. But that was just there, just at the end of the bar. There is a little bit of processing, a tiny bit of saturation on it. Sometimes, oh yeah, you can definitely, you know. I mean, it's making it louder, but there's also colorization going on in there that isn't part of the original sound. And all I've done here is I've actually used the basic Cubase channel strip, just with the tube saturation on. I can actually get the plugin up for that there. There's how simple it is. Look, it wasn't actually a big deal. I just literally put it on, kind of liked it, and that was it. But it seems a bit thicker as well than the original, if you can do that with a hi-hat, but that's how it sounds. Anyway, so little incidental sounds coming in. Now at this point, 8 bars in, I'm thinking, right, I need progression now. I need to start evolving this. So I basically went into Reactor, and I can't tell you what I used, not because I don't want to, but because simply I don't know what it was. But I've got a Reactor bounce here of something that I made, and it sounded like this. And that's actually been faded in. I found it quite interesting, and when I put it with the layer, it just added to the tension. I don't think I did a great deal to this, I could be wrong. Nothing on the strip. It's rare that I use the strip. Yeah, and actually nothing on the inserts either. Nothing at all. It was just straight out of Reactor. It's almost like it worked. I didn't need to do anything to it, so I thought, hell, I'm just committing straight away. When you find those sounds, it's always really important to just jump in and get them in there. And I mean, it's fading in. I did that processing post making the sound. But the thing with Reactor is, and what I want to stress is, sometimes in my experience, I've made these amazing sounds at the time, and then when I've gone to load the project back up, the sounds disappeared. I've got something different because probably didn't do something specific in Reactor to make sure it came back. So what I always do with Reactor and synths that are a little bit kind of, you know, you don't know if you're going to be able to kind of necessarily get the program back if you have to, just bounce it into audio, just so you've got it then. And with that sound, I was pretty much sure I wouldn't be able to get it again if I lost it. So Okay, so they're the two basic layers that make up the intro. And you can hear that one slowly coming in on the fade. But what else we've got is around this sort of 8 bar mark that's starting to come in is effects. So I've got this little kind of texture effect, and yeah, basically that's just coming in again, filling in a space for me. Okay, let's just have a little look at what's on that. So a low cut, I say a low cut, sorry, that's a low shelf. Low cut would be this. Okay, so it's just a low shelf, and I showed you low shelf just now when I was actually pushing the frequency, but in this I'm reducing it. Sometimes I'll use a low shelf just to dampen rather than completely cut away. It's like saying, hey guys, you can stay at the party, but you've got to calm down, rather than chucking them out. You know, like with low end, I find it's just nice to kind of have that option, and try that if you're not already, because you can find that if you cut away too much low end, it just goes very thin. It's natural that that's going to happen, but you can sometimes cut off just enough with a low shelf that you get it just as you want it without getting rid of all of it. And you can see in the example there, I'll just play that again. That small amount is all I wanted to roll off. Okay, cool, so that sound's coming in. There's no effects on that apart from that little bit of EQ, but it sat nicely with and then what I did is I went and got another one and did a similar kind of thing, another effect, and just replaced. Almost sounds like robotics, doesn't it? Again, separate EQing. I'm just taking down the low end with a shelf, nice and subtly, and I was also just reducing any top end. I'm not really sure at the time why I did it. I don't think that would make any massive audible difference, but you know, producers, I mean, personally, I am a bit OCD about things like that, so I will do a cut sometimes if I think there might be something menacing there. Okay, so 2 layers that are being added into our main layers that are constant. I then thought, well, I could copy those over, but instead, why don't I copy it over and then replace it with a different texture? So here's another one that replaces the first one that came in. Again, that's almost like Foley. That's almost like someone's tapping on a typewriter and there's some sort of motorbike going past or something. But when you listen to it in the context of what's going on with everything, it's literally just filling that gap. If I took that sound effect out there and just played it without, for me, that's still empty. That still needs that little texture in there just to give it detail. There we go. It's not getting in the way, but it's accompanying nicely. And then I've gone and copied the second one over. We just copied that over and changed the first one to this one. And you know, however you're going to get there, man, just get there. You know, use as many sounds as you want. Use every single one different if you want. But I wanted to have some sort of repetition. Like I think any dance music should have potentially have some repetition. It has to. Okay, so we've looked at all those sounds, but there's now a big sound coming in across the whole, over the whole thing, which is just a downlifter, a sample I found. Transition's really important at certain points in the track for me. Like if I'm not hearing some sort of transitional sound coming in at the end of a 32 bar period of texture, then for me I'm like missing that, and it always seems to be something I tick, some sort of interest at that point. So, you know, 32 bars, something's going to happen. It's either going to start to build up or it's going to drop or something's going to happen, you know. So I don't think I did much process into that at all. Just high shelf reduction, again, just dampening, not cutting. I'm sure if I turn that off, that's going to be way too bright. Let's have a look. Yeah. Wasn't feeling that brightness in the original sound at all, so just reduced it slightly. Yeah, but that's a simple sort of faller riser kind of thing going on there. But when you think about it, elements now, two main things, some incidental sort of sound effects that are coming in, that sound and that little bass sound that came in at the start, it was on massive. That's pretty much it to this point. Okay, so that's pretty much the first 32 bars there covered from start to finish, apart from the little hi-hat, which it would be a shame not to look at it, so let's just, there's a couple of little hi-hats actually. There's this one, and there's also the constant kind of typical, quarter note hat. Let's talk about that one first. So I don't think there's anything on here at all. No, literally just dry, literally for the DJ, but it fitted with no reverb or anything for me. This guy down here is more a sort of knocking percussion with a click at the end of it. It was completely like that when I found it, and all I've done to it is two things. I've rolled off the low end, so I have actually cut that, look, with an actual low cut, which has kind of helped it, and then I've just driven it with the tube. There's not really much to explain with the tube apart from you use the drive and then you use the output to gain stage if it's too loud, or if it's what you want, you leave it where it is. But you can hear the clear difference from both those processes. That sound just didn't sit right with me. And I think it's important to remember as well, while I'm thinking of this right now, is that nobody else is going to hear these sounds on their own. So that means that although you have the power to do that, don't neglect the power of having to listen to it all together and actually commit to that, because that's where it's going to be most important. You can, all day EQ something or process it without everything else going on, but if you're not actually getting it to sit in that mix, it could potentially be pointless, So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, something I always try to bring up with my clients as well. Let's just hear that in the mix with and without that process then. See what I mean? It's lost. It doesn't sound, it's much better. And that's what I'm talking about. I probably did do a bit of that on the sound on its own, but then I would definitely listen back within a minute to see if it's working with the whole scheme of things, Okay, cool, that's that explained. You've got another little sound, sort of percussive sound, and this all helps, mixing obviously for DJs. Not that it is about that, but I think it sometimes does depend on if the DJ could actually play it. So with little things like this, you are going to be making that more available, I guess, in that sense. Okay, that's just that little reverse symbol. So that's all of the stuff for the first 32. Then we have this 16 bar amount of time. And in this 16 bar amount of time, I need to break away from what I've created as the sort of transition from intro to where we are now, and transition away from that using the word again to actually get to the drop. So I've got 16 bars to basically do that in, to make it DJ friendly and whatnot. So let's just have a listen to what happens. Okay, so basically we've got a kind of fall away, like I say, from the intro. At this point here, we've got a sound coming in, and it's what I call a transitional sound. Okay, it's actually, believe it or not, the sound that I used earlier on where you couldn't hear it properly. That is something I didn't realise, but a nice kind of two birds with one stone kind of technique there. We couldn't hear it as well because there was that bed of sound going on from the atmospherics in the intro. But now we've got it on its own and we're actually playing it without that big bed. It's actually right there, look. You can even see it's on the same thing. So and it kind of makes it fall away. The transition's short, but it kind of makes it just fall away. And I'm still holding everybody with the sound of that little weird almost sort of sequence that's going on. I've left that in and dropped the main pad. So you've still got that connection, if you will, to the intro at this point. Still keeping those incidental textures coming in. There was a little sound effect there that hasn't been heard yet. That's just a one shot. I find loads of these. Again, these are just what I was talking about in the beginning. I'll get a lot of sounds that you only hear once or twice in the arrangement. That has got some processing on it, simple stuff, just a simple ping pong delay. Every door's got one of these, and I've got it set. You can see the settings there, quarter note, 65 on the feedback, yeah, applicable kind of low and high filters, and then just a mild mix of 35%. But without it, it just kind of, it didn't really sit right. It needed that little tail. And it's subtle, but you can still hear it now. They're the kind of small attention to detail that I go for in the track. You know, other producers may have just left that with no tail, but I just felt it needed to sit right. And that's the difference, I guess, with just putting it in there and then not giving it its TLC, you know? Okay, so we've got that little sound. It's starting to build. Now, so the first 8 is kind of getting down, and then the second 8 is where it's actually starting to build up. And at this point, I have got another massive in here, just making a riser effect, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, so, okay, so I made this little riser effect. Let's just have a little. Yeah, and I just played that in to make it rise. It's almost like shaking up a bottle of Coke, and just to the point that it's just gonna, you know, and that's essential for a drop, I think. You've got to have some kind of rise if you really want to kind of build. You don't have to, but like I think to build tension again and that drop, you know. But that's the only rise in there. There's a Vox that comes in, which is, let's have a look at that. I believe I got this from a source.
After I am gone,
yeah.
your earth will be freed and without its miserable span of existence.
So I think that was pre-processed before I put it in here, because I haven't got that much on it. It certainly sounds processed to me. I have got 2 plugins that we need to quickly have a little listen to. They were actually turned off, but they should have been turned on. That was where I was messing with it.
After I am gone,
there we go. So
after I am gone,
we've got 2 plugins, both Cubase simple plugins that probably every door has got.
After I am gone,
but that's without them.
After I am gone, after I am gone, your earth will be freed and without its miserable span.
And what they do is they just seem to crisp it up a little bit, and it's actually just this one that's doing that. It's the Bit Crusher. I've been using Bit Crushers for absolutely ages, ever since they really started coming about, because I remember the time when the hardware didn't even have Bit Crushers. You know, we didn't have Bit Crushers on some of the Akai's and things like that, but now you can just put a Bit Crusher on anything and literally just sort of, you know, make the sample rate worse, which can sound really good, and it does. Here it kind of really brings out, you know, the crispiness of, it feels like it should have had all the time for me. The settings are simple. It's just a Bit Crusher setting of 4 and then 12 bits. It's being crushed by 100% on the output, 100% on the mix. That's it. These little guys just give you options so you can have different types of setup for it. So if you go back, you know, you can just get a slightly different algorithm. But with this, I left it all at 100%. And this, I don't think this delay is actually doing anything on this. Let me have a quick look. It looks like it was supposed to be automated, but the mix is at 0, so I don't think that made. It's not doing anything at the moment. Let me just turn on this little, right, I can see, okay, so it gets automated there later on in the track. Right there, look. So that hasn't happened yet. We can always look at that later. But yeah, that's the vocal. A little bit of bit crushing on it, but definitely pre-production. Would have been some pitching going on there, potentially some pitching and some maybe ring mod actually applied to that vocal, I think. I can't remember, it was so long ago. Okay, so let's have a little look at the drums then for this track. So drums will have been all on one group and will all be in a folder. So I'm just going to do a few things up so I can just get to those without everything else on the screen. That's a great thing about folders, you know, you need to get to the drums, and you go, and there they are. Let's just solo that group. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom on in there and have a look at just a loop, because essentially once you've got, you know, a bar or two or four, it depends, I guess, but I can get a beat going pretty much in one bar, and then I expand it and, you know, start adding kind of little bits here and there. And with this, you can actually see it is actually all down to one bar, just from the blocks here. So if I go there, you can see that this is the main kind of repetition I was talking about earlier. That's my beat. That's definitely how I created it in that time space, and then I just started expanding it out as I went. So let's just have a look at the fundamentals. We've got the main kick, okay, which is just seems nice and kind of punchy and was a good source material. I can't stress enough how the good sounds are out there. It's not, for me, I rarely kind of layer 3 kick drums these days. I used to when I was experimenting, and everybody has to do that to understand about what they're looking for. For me, I like to find different genre kind of one shots, you know, like tech house, for instance, even, and also trap has actually been a place I've been going to recently to get a sound source that I'm looking for that isn't just what I'm looking for, but is also not part of a drum and bass mentality sample pack thing, because I'm finding that listening to a lot of people's music, the clients I teach, that at the beginning they're using just a sample pack I've heard so many times. You know, I've heard the same snare in probably 5 different clients' tracks, and I'm like, I really need to try and help people to stop them doing that. So my mentality has always been sample away from the genre that you're producing. Dubstep is definitely another place that I like to go, and this actually sounds like it's either come from a trap or a dubstep background to me. Now there's a little tiny bit of processing on this. Let's just turn it off. But with a kick, again, I'm looking for an initial sound that I think is going to be good enough as is, and then just try to do any small kind of tasks that I need to. Now I've added a Fab Filter Pro Q here, just rolling off with a cut some of the low end, because, and this is something I don't always do, but in this track I did, I felt that the low end was that much that it just needed a cut, not a shelf like I mentioned earlier. And you can still see there in the chart of the pre and post EQ that's going on there in the EQ. It's like the dark line is telling us where we were, and the lighter grey line is where we currently are, and that cut hasn't really done that much. Some plugins really show that nicely. That's why I love the Fab Filter, because it's very visual, and sometimes visual can really help with the audio kind of perspective. I've then added, I believe, a very small amount of low boost, only 3.5 dBs, but straight away I can just hear that that's giving it, for me, what it needed, nothing more than that. That's it, that's my kick for this track. Then we've got this main snare. And again, when I found this was one sound. I did not layer these sounds or anything with this. I found this as a sound, and I went and processed it. Let's have a little look at what I did. So a bit of processing on here, a little bit of minimal EQing going on. Very typical of me to have this little, I mentioned it on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, tiny little boost, sometimes 2 dBs on a high shelf at 1K. It's just, you know, we don't like to add EQ constantly, but a little tiny bit like that can give you a great perspective on if something needs a bit more clarity lift or if it's actually okay. And for me, I probably did that at the end of doing all this other process. So let's turn that off, and let's turn these off and have a listen to the snare. Okay, this is with it on. Okay, so I'll just take you through why I did and what I did. So you can hear straight away from the source, it doesn't sound fat enough, but at the time when I found it, I was like, that's fat, but it wasn't. I got it in machine. I do all my drums in machine, it's no secret. Ask any client of mine, they'll let you know that I've taught them the drums in machine. And the point is that machine allows you to just take raw samples and simply manipulate the amplitude of the sample so you can control its overall sound. Okay, that's all I've done in machine, no, nothing else. I found the sample. It probably had quite a bit of reverb on it and I probably cut that off with a bit of decay. So I've added the UAD, vintage UAD Pultec EQ. Why have I used this? This is my favourite EQ actually for kicks and snares, I find. I really like the warmth. It has a general warmth that you run anything through it and it gets a bit of colorization if you EQ or you don't, which is very cool. And it's just desirable. You know, it's got a desirable sound to it. And all I've done is I've actually added 200, I've added at 200 Hertz, just 2 dB. So let's put that in. Straight away, you can see it even on here, it starts to, on my analyzer on the EQ there, it just jumps up a little bit. So that's all I'm doing is actually manipulating that frequency with this EQ. I am also attenuating the top end ever so slightly. So see here, this is a peak, that means I'm adding EQ. But down here it says a 10, so that means I'm taking away. I can also boost with this one down here, but I'm actually just taking away about just over 2 dBs of 8,000 Hertz there. That's it, 8,000. And that's it, that's a simple EQing I'm doing on the snare. Then I'm using a transient master by Native Instruments, fantastic plugin, let's have a listen to that. Okay, it doesn't sound like it does that much, but for me, what a transient master is doing is just going for the start of the sound, the transient at the beginning, and that means it's giving it a bit more kind of you know, punch, if you will. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it is. It's kind of attacking the beginning of the sound to make it a little bit more punchy. And if I increase that punch, see, as opposed to having none at all, you can hear now I'm actually depleting the punch. So, you know, I went for a mild mix of 34%. It's subtle, but definitely makes a difference. And then after that, I'm adding the Trans-X, which again is a transient designer, but it's a multi-band one. So you could say I'm kind of going over the top with another plugin that does the same thing. It does, but this one is a multi-band, so it allows you to manipulate certain bands of frequency of transient rather than doing the whole sound, which is what that transient master was doing basically. So with this, you can see the settings. I've actually applied it to the area that I was pushing with the EQ, around that sort of 200 range. And these two bands are obviously giving us that central point here. And then I've just taken up the range and the sensitivity. Sensitivity is on 4, the range is on 14. I believe I might have, no, I don't think I did. I don't think I even turned down the trim. That's just bang on there like that. And again, it's subtle, but I think it's more noticeable than it was when I did the transient master. But if I turn the transient master off, again, like, it needed both of them. Okay, so that's the snare covered, apart from that little tiny bit of EQ which just went in at the end. Like that, just lifting that clarity ever so slightly at the top. And that's the snare. Add to that then a clap just over the top of the snare. That's all it is. If we put those together though, you can hear how the clap is just accompanying the snare and just almost just giving it a little bit of body and a little bit of space, so it's not just statically dead. The clap's got a Aphex vintage. So definitely one I always like to use for a clap. You can hear straight away that it is, again, lifting the clarity ever so slightly. It's just a simple case of just using these dials. AX mix is quite obvious what it does. That's the main guy you need to worry about. And then also to that, I've got a reverb This is a really old one, but a classic. It's the Renaissance Reverb by Waves. And that's without it. And that's with it. So we've just gone through the sort of really main, the fundamentals really there of the kick and snare. If we just review what we've actually got from looking at that. So then to that I've had to add groove. You know, people always say it in my lessons, people step to the beat but they move to the groove. So the groove has been created from a load of different one-shots from Machine. You can see along here it's saying group A1 blah blah blah. That's just me being lazy and not actually naming the groups. If I solo them and just don't play anything else, just have a listen to that. So that's that little groove that I was mentioning. And already, even though I've heard it a million times, I'm moving. See what I mean? You step to the beat, but you move to the groove. And I'm just moving about a little bit. And cliche as hell, but what's going on is they're all just little one-shot hits. I'm not going to break each one down because it will just take too long. Everyone's got hi-hats like this. There's the main one, and then if we cycle down, you notice that I've got little bits of panning going on. So if I just cycle through these ones here, oh, it's not allowing me to do that. Let me just click on them. So yeah, you can see along the side here, look, in my inspector, that the panning is changing. Some are in the middle, and some are going left, some are going right. And what that's basically doing is it's just fanning out those elements a little bit in the stereo image. Therefore not making them all just follow that same mono mentality, which they probably weren't doing. They're stereo tracks, but they would have been pretty much in the middle. And just doing that little bit of left and right for me just literally spreads out the mix a little bit. And you know, that's not a drum and bass thing. That's been doing on records for years. Like, I'm sure if you go and look at Beatles or, you know, people like that, Michael Jackson. Yeah, and all these little guys are also doing the same thing. Look, they're all just kind of a little bit left of right, one of the two. So there is how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 elements there, and it seems crazy to think of that all being in a one-bar loop. But they actually are, as you can see. And then reintroduce the kick, clap and snare. There is the rolling drum that you can hear. And if you just start to take away some of those hats, you see how they're detrimental to the groove. Look, I've just taken a couple away at random, and you can already hear that the space is starting to get less and less. It's filled up, so they are needed. The drums are all going to one bus, as classically does happen in nearly every production tutorial I've ever seen. Okay, so on the bus I have got nothing actually processing as far as I can see. A tiny, again, little bit of, oh, I can hear that difference from that. It's so subtle, but again, sometimes you're just looking for that very subtle boost. But yeah, there's not actually anything on there that's doing anything constantly to the sound at the moment. Just that EQ. So yeah, my Beats bus is quite simple, I guess you could say, in that respect. Some people have a compressor on there. Sometimes I do have a compressor on there, but for this, I think I tried it and it just didn't work for me. So if it doesn't work for you, take it off. You don't have to put it on there. I think that's important and was something we just learnt from that. So that's the drums explained. That's everything all to the master bus, which we'll obviously look at the master bus in a bit. There is a sidechain kick which has been muted this whole time, which doesn't make any actual sound. Let me just show you what I mean. Yeah, so you can see it's registering there, but no sound is coming out. It's what's called a ghost kick, and I use that for sidechain compression, just to have a signal go into the compressor to sidechain. Again, we'll look at that a little bit later on when we get to the bass. But yeah, that's the drums for now. So the bass would be the next thing I'd want to look at on the drop. Okay, so we've got the bass just coming in at 48 bars, which is, you know, the way it was always going to come in to be DJ friendly, I guess. The first bass sound is almost like a, you know, I guess it's a womp, you guess, but it almost sounds a little bit like almost ghostly, like it's not a normal, you know, I can make a womp with a square wave in literally a minute. It's not that, because that's not what it sounds like. What's going on there is massive, but there's some processing going on. I'll quickly look at the preset just to see what the sound source was, if anyone was wondering. Yeah, it's actually been made from carbon, and just carbon alone. Tiny bit of mod going on the wavetable position. That's being done by Performer 8, it looks like. Yeah, so that's basically just modulating it with a sawtooth set at this ratio, which is 3/8. You know, if I change that ratio, get a different sound. We're also pitch modulating with another Performer on a saw wave, but it's actually doing a 1-to-1 ratio, so that'll be quite slow. Seeing if I change that, get quite an interesting sound as well. Disregard any of the other knobs here because they're just all turned down. And then what I'm using is a band pass. So that's actually the sound before the band pass. See how characteristical that is? Like, that's so important. Like, that process for me is like, that's the point where it goes from just a noisy kind of, that sounds sick, but it just doesn't sound quite as characteristical as that movement. And we're doing that with the Performer, but this time with the Performer I've actually used a randomized, I believe that was randomly made wave kind of sequence, if you like, that just follows as I, and you can see I haven't used any of this, just this little bit at the end. I've looped 15 and 16, and that's how I've made that work. Add to that some clipping, that little insert there, just doing a little bit of a clip effect, and also we've got a dimension expander, which again will add additional gain as well as some, I like to call it a light shadow. Yeah, that's that sound covered pretty much. The processing on it that I've used, let's just turn that off for a second. So it had more low end in it basically. It was quite menacing, because the thing was, it wasn't sitting right with my sub having all that in there. So I had to do a few little adjustments. I basically put a FabFilter Pro Q on there and used a bandpass effect to actually reduce everything. Like, a bandpass is basically a low and a high pass together, allowing one band to pass, and that's what I've done there with that example. Slightly sort of adjusting little peaks in it. Straight away in my EQ analyzer you can see how it's reduced compared to how it is before the plugin's put on. So that's just me sort of really homing in on what I wanted from there. We've then got a limiter shoved on there, doing a little bit of work. Actually, it doesn't look like it's doing much at all. But it does sound different, if you can hear it. You can hear it's distorting before the limiter actually goes on, and the limiter kind of relaxes it a bit and actually sorts that distortion out, even though there's no actual gain reduction showing. I think that's quite cool. And then finally I'm just adding my usual kind of tool, which is my output. I've just added a, you can get this plugin for free, Synaxis 3G fader, and I've put that up 2.5 dBs. So basic gain staging, I guess, because I'd already used the output here. That's why I went and added a different one there. And I like to do that rather than turning it up sometimes when I'm just seeing if a process is actually making it louder, or if I actually am getting a colour instead of just loudness. It can be difficult to tell sometimes. So that's the first kind of cool bass covered. Right underneath that there is a sub, which you can hear there, and that is literally handling the low fundamentals, the bass of the sound. The massive that we just looked at was doing the top end and the character, but this will be handling like the sub. And all it simply is it's actually a square wave I've used. And can you hear how it's bending like that? It's actually got the same bend that's on the sound that it's underneath. And because I'm holding it, you're hearing it, but remember the sound that is actually being played is very short. So if I play the sound, we're only getting that. If I hold it, you get the pitch, but that on a sub, that same pitch on a sub is that. I've just noticed I've turned the intensity down. And the intensity acts a bit like a low pass harmonic filter, I like to call it, because it definitely takes all the top end away when you bring it down. And that is in the spectrum mode. These other modes do a different type of intensity, but I'm not going to go into that for this because we're only using the spectrum mode. What I have done here is I've actually reduced a frequency there, and I think that will be due to the certain note that I've pressed. So if we look, yeah, can you see there when it's playing, it's actually cutting out the second harmonic fundamental from the bass, just there. I probably did that just to create space with the mid-range bass. I found that they were fighting a little bit. And in a fighting situation, you can either use a sidechain technique, or you can use a dynamic EQ, or you can just EQ like this. And that's what I decided to do, just put a static cut in there at minus 18 dB. So that is on my sub, on that particular sub for that sound. Okay, let's move to the second bass that comes in. That's massive as well. You can hear there's no actual bass in that, but that's probably all been cut away. Let's just turn off the processing. And there's your bass. As soon as I've put it all back to straight out of massive, that's what it sounds like. So what have I done with this? 3 plugins. FabFilter Pro Q, just taking off all the lows with a cut there. Then we've got the BBE, fantastic plugin, really good for just giving a little bit of clarity lift sometimes on a sound. So that's without it. It's night and day really. And then I'm using this side widener plugin, which is bang, computer music, baby. There it is. You can grab that plugin for free when you buy the magazine. And I've been using this for years because I love computer music. Yeah, and it's not actually by them, it's by Boss and JST, but for some reason I got it through that and found out about it through computer music. And all I'm using it for is just to give us a little bit of stereo image. So if I show you before, if I turn it to mono, is it mono? No, if I bypass the plugin, so that's the visual before. And then what it's doing is slightly kind of moving it a little bit wider, but you can hear it, like, just gives it a little bit of stereo image, a little bit of left and right. And all those plugins together added with some EQ. What did I do? Just looking. Okay, I believe I did this. Yeah. Reductive EQing whenever you can. You know, subtract away to leave the frequencies you want. And in this case, I needed to get more of the top end of the bass rather than all of this low mid and stuff here and this high mid here. So when I engage that and then I take it off, yeah, it's fuller without it, but for the mix, it worked better. When I add back in everything else, remember always to kind of add it back in and make sure it's working in the whole context. Let's just take that EQ off. And then back on. For me, that's sitting so much better, and just, you know, it's an extra 5-10% on the sound than how it was without that EQ. That bass is actually being made, we haven't talked about the actual sound source, in massive again. And it was actually, it's a morphed bass from a track I made called Simpleton back in 2013, I think it was. And the important thing kind of to remember here is sounds that you made a long time ago, as you get better at synthesis, I find you go back to them and you actually find ways to manipulate and make them better than they were. So it's always really important to save your presets and make sure you categorize by year. For Massive, I've got from 2011 onwards, every year I've just made a new folder and stored my sounds in there, any presets in there, and that way you can kind of go back and also see how you've come on. It's really inspiring. For this, doesn't sound that great with all that processing taking the lows out of it, but what has actually been created here is I've used Scrapyard on oscillator 1, detuned it by 2 octaves, and that's pretty much it. You can see everything else that's on there. Oscillator 2 is an additive 2. Both of them are being manipulated by pitch modulation, which is being controlled from envelope 1. And that is that slow downward kind of process you can hear going on. If that wasn't there, it would just be straight. The reason it does go on is because of this attack here. If I change the attack, so I got it just right there basically. Also, oscillator 3 has got a grain on it, so when you really get down to it, those layers really all matter. And sometimes, like I showed you earlier, I'll use a massive and use 1 oscillator, but this time I use 3. 2 types of filter going on here. Reductive, it's like cutting into granite basically. You're like low pass and a band pass, both being modulated by number 6. There you go, there's that performance going on there, and I'm using the top one. Two over 8. We've got some clipping going on in both inserts. Wow, again, another kind of moment I'm always looking for. Those 2 plugins there have changed the game for it. But it was almost like a bell sound. The clipping is just, the double clipping is just really intensifying the sound. Look, you've got one of them that the first one gets it nearly there, and then I've used a second one just to go even further. And if that's the sound you're looking for, which it was in this case, then go for that, you know. Finally, we're just using a teletube. Again, it's adding a bit of bite. It's being used quite mildly because remember we've already saturated the hell out of it already with these 2 clippers, so I'm only going to do a tiny bit more. But even that is noticeable. And then we've got a dimension expander, again mildly on there, 9 o'clock on both values. And then an EQ. The EQ is actually quite important. What's happening here is I'm modulating the boost and the frequency with 2 LFOs. Sorry, one's an LFO, one is a performer. So the performer that I use for the filter cutoffs, I'm using for the frequency. So it's a bit like using the EQ, a bit like a filter again. But instead I'm actually modulating the boost with just an LFO. And it's subtle, but it definitely gives it a little flavour that I was looking for. And that's that bass described. So underneath that bass sound that we just looked at, the massive answer bass, there is a sub doing its little thing. Just kind of bringing the low-end fundamentals into perspective. You can see there it's actually a sine wave, and it's the same. It's just if I hold it down, it's a low note. There you go. You can hear it slowly going down in pitch rather than the speed that the other sine wave was going in for the other sound, just because it follows it in that way. So that's underneath, and that completes those 2 basses. Now there's a little bass that's coming in there that's almost like a laser bass, I kind of would call it. Let's go and have a look at that. Now that's not made in Massive, that's made in Serum. So I'm pretty sure everyone out there knows what Serum is, but in case you don't, it is basically like Massive, wavetable synthesis. but with a whole load of other features which we won't go into today. But it's definitely one of the flagship VSTs in my production, and I've designed some awesome presets for it that I'm looking forward to releasing soon. I already released some, but I've made some new ones, and this is not one of them, I don't think. I think this is actually a version of one of my presets I've already released. It says Jim's Alligator there, as you can see. And that's the note I played. What's actually happening here then? So if I just turn a few things off, I'm going to just turn off all the effects so that we can literally see how the sound is made, because there's not a lot of processing on this sound, I don't believe. Let's have a look. Yeah, one plugin is actually on it as an insert, so the whole sound is being made in the synth. And when I've worked with people before, they're just like, they can't believe that some of the sounds I've made have not had any post-processing after the synth. It's like, you know, I'm not trying to say I'm blowing people's minds with my effects change on my synths, but I'm just kind of like to be able to do it in the synth. That way it's kind of always there, and I don't have to rely on some chain of plugins that I've got. God forbid we move into a new bit realm and it starts doing some crazy bit depth that the plugins don't do anymore, which is currently happening with 32 and 64. A lot of people are losing plugins. I am one of those people as well. Anyway, that's beside the point. Let's just break this down. So I'm turning the filters off. What else have we got here? There's nothing else. So there's the basic sound. Turn off that plugin as well. There you go. So that's straight out of Serum there. And what I'm doing is I'm using two oscillators, but one is actually being used to create the sound and one is being used as a modulator. It's what's called FM synthesis. And this is, you know, done in lots of other types of synthesizers, but Serum does it really well. And the way it works is, if you check out oscillator B, it looks like it's just doing a sine wave, right? But what that's actually doing is that is controlling this guy. So if I turn it off, notice it's very subtle. But that is the frequency modulation that's going on there. You can see it says FM from B here. If I increase that, if I turn this off now, there you go. So I was doing it very subtly, and a tiny little bit of modulation is going on there. I can tell it's tiny. Let's have a look. It's actually assigned to macro 1 and LFO 1. So this guy, there you go, that's the amount of FM I'm actually doing to the sound. The wavetable position is being modulated by LFO 1 as well. In fact, LFO 1 is doing 17 different things. If you see there, see that little 17? That tells you that it's got 17 different destinations. So doing a hell of a lot of work with that LFO there on the sound. It's doing the level of our sound. It's also doing the level of the sub. So I guess what I'm saying here is, you know, one modulator can be super powerful once you get it into a synth, start to try and put it on other things. We're also affecting the remap of Serum there with this little drawing, some sort of like algorithm I came up with, which is being modulated again by that LFO. Cool. The alligator, without that, we're just getting a sine wave basically. Okay, there's the basic sound. There's no kind of crazy voices or anything added to this. Yeah, let's have a look at the filters. So the filters, again, being controlled by LFO1, the cutoff and the frequency of the drive, I believe, yeah. Because we're using a multi-filter here, it's actually giving us quite a crazy algorithm. It's almost like two filters, or almost like an EQ actually being moved. And without that, it doesn't make a huge difference. But subtly I can hear it lifting ever so slightly with that, what's going on there. Add to that then we've got a hell of a load of effects here. So we've got a dimension and a hyper dimension they call it. Dimension expander from Massive is basically this bit, and this is the hyper bit that Steve Duda added from Serum. And you can hear straight away it's just giving us a dimension that wasn't there before, a little bit of left and right activity. Then you've got, oh, my mouse is running out of buttons. My mouse is running out of batteries. You've got a saturation going on after that. And check out, the drive is being modulated again by LFO1. I've just been sticking LFO1 on all sorts of things in this patch. And you can see it's increasing the drive amount there. Kind of filthing it up a little bit. Then you've got a flanger on there. That's pretty subtle. We've only got that on about sort of 15%. Then we've got a phaser, again being modulated by LFO1. Really subtle. Chorus, that's not really doing much. And then EQ. With the EQ, I'm almost making the same kind of thing that I did here, if you look. 2 different frequencies are being modulated by LFO1. It gives us a little bit of a vowel sort of, almost a vowel feel to it. Then I've got another filter. Then the multi-band compressor. For me, the multi-band compressor just levels it out a little bit and just makes it more consistent. That's what it should be doing, really. When I turn it off, it feels like the highs have dipped down a little bit. Yeah, so, you know, get there however you need to get there. In this case, it feels like I went in to use every single plugin to try and make this work, but right at the end we've got some reverb, which I believe again is being modulated by something else. I think that is actually, if you just hover over it, it should tell you. Here you go, macro 3. So if we look at macro 3, which is this one, you can see I've hardly got any on there. If I increase it, you can actually hear it now. Quite obvious, but just a tiny bit of that mixed in. And that's pretty much the sound. We had a sub on there, I mentioned. It's a sine wave, and it is being modulated. Its amplitude is being modulated just like the Alligator main wavetable, the same amount. So there's another bass in this that comes in. So the bass is quite a kind of formula. It's like, you know, there's different ones coming in to fill different spaces. You've got your call and answer. You've got that serum coming in there, and then there is another one that comes in to finish. It's that one, and that's like, that almost then resolves the loop so it can go back and start again. And that's really important when it comes to these bass formulas or any kind of chord progression or anything like that, a beat even. It's got to resolve, it's got to be able to be you know, looped. That's where you have that breakthrough of actually being able to write something then. With this sound, that was the last kind of bass, and it's massive again. It's actually another sound I made from an old track called Grotty Chops, and I've made so many variations when I was making Grotty Chops that I just grabbed this one from there. It seemed to kind of fit, and I probably tweaked it a little bit. Let's just look at the processing then. One plugin on it again, we'll get to that, we'll turn it off. And what is it actually? Oh, it's Voice of God. So again, I definitely use Voice of God. There you go, it's night and day for me. It's like low end or no low end without it. And a lot of the time, trying to EQ something like that in is just, it's quite difficult to do. You'd think, oh, well, you just need to add a little bit of low mid. It's not the case at all. This plugin is really kind of intelligent in the way it works. Okay, so that's on there. We've also got, going on inside the plugin, one effect. So I'll just put that on nothing so it reminds me. So there's one effect on there, no inserts, and one filter. So if I strip that back, okay, that's the basic sound. It's a throat wavetable. It's being detuned by 1 octave, and it's just being modulated, the wavetable, by a saw. Once we apply a filter to that, again, it's that point of character that comes in from the filter being added, bandpass filter, being modulated again by a performer. So it's a similar kind of process for all the basses in this track, the way that I've designed them, and I believe I was using a mixture of making new basses like the one in Serum and then the first bass, and then using a mixture of those and maybe basses I've created previously in other tracks and then manipulating them differently so they're not the same as the other tracks I've done previously, if that makes sense. It's just kind of going into your sound and then seeing what you can take from it to make something new from it, I guess, and it keeps it cohesive with your sound by doing that, I find anyway. Okay, cool, so you can see the settings that I've done for that. I don't need to explain every single dial, I don't think. There's no inserts, and all I was using was the dimension expander at the end. And it's quite clear that that is, even on the master, you can see the left and right, so just getting that little bit of separation. Great plug-in, the dimension expander. Just don't go mad with it on everything because your mix will sound super weird. Okay, that's that sound. Didn't do any low cut on that, but did put a sub underneath it, just like all the other basses. But it didn't feel to me like it needed a... Did I do a sub on it? Actually, I didn't do a sub on it. There is no sub on that. That is literally I think the reason there is no sub is because I put this on there, this little labs. I actually got the weight out of it, all I wanted with just this plugin. And that's another nice example to show you that you don't always put a sub under it, even though I just thought just then I did, because naturally I usually do. I didn't here, and you don't have to. There's times when I've put this plugin on, I'm like, I don't think it needs a sub, so I haven't put it on there. You know, be creative, change out of that traditional road you keep going down, and sometimes you'll discover some really great techniques like that. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it will just be a load of rubbish and you'll just go back to your normal technique. But for me, that showed to me that I can actually make a bass without having to necessarily have a separate sub underneath it. Okay, so that's the resolve, and then it's looping again on itself. The subtle change is that I've gone and copied, I've kind of copied the sound that was there. So this massive sound that we just did, if I sort of like look at it into relation of a balance and where I'm going to put it next, so if I was going to copy it over, it would go there. What I've done is I've just deleted that and replaced it with another sound that I've made in Serum. There you go, it's that sound there. So that is not, you know, the same sound at all, but yet it does have a kind of character that sounds similar to me, familiar with that sound that we just heard. And when I started toing and throwing them in say a 4-bar loop that I had, I was like, yeah, this kind of works. It kind of balances nicely and keeps it interesting. So this is another preset I made from scratch. It's very simple compared to the other one. It's just literally just a wave, and I called it Bullfrog. The main of the sound is going to be coming from the filter. I've gone for just a normal low pass filter, but what I've done is I've done a massive resonance boost. And I've also done some driving. This drive feature kind of saturates the sound a little bit before it goes into the filtration stage, and is really kind of useful for just adding that pre-pushed sort of sound sometimes. I mean, if I took that down, it's got no arrogance about it now, you know. Cut-off's being modulated by LFO 1. This time we haven't got anywhere near as many LFOs going on, we've just got 5, but see how Serum sort of shows you when you click on the LFOs where they are and what it's doing, and if it doesn't, you can just hover over that little number there. Another thing I'm doing with this is I'm actually doing the panning position is being modulated by LFO 1. That's another nice thing to try out to give yourself a little bit of separation. It's small things like this that, you know, that add up to quite a big difference in the sound. Let's have a look at the effects. There's no direct sub, by the way, on that. There's a little bit of noise. And the noise makes quite a big difference. Without it, it's still there, but it gives it the sort of crispiness, you know? And that's just an air can. If we actually take off the oscillator, again, the level's being modulated by LFO 1. This echoes back to me just saying try the modulator on lots of different things once you've got it in on something. The effects wise is quite simple as well. If I just turn them off, so you can hear the sound is quite kind of bland actually. It needed a little bit of high shelf lift. And then I used dimension expander. Just the dimension part, I kept the hyper part, I just turned the mix right down on. So if you ever do just want to use the dimension, turn the mix down and then you've just got that. And I added a reverb at the bottom of it. You know, if I increase the mix, you can hear that that's the actual reverb, but nowhere near needing that much on this sound. There is the other Serum sound done then. There's a little different sound comes in to fill that space. See what I mean? There's a filling of the space there with that little bass there, then there's a filling there. Then here, this is almost like a little laser. And that was just made in massive. Not a really complicated sound at all, just a saw square. Pitch modulation, as you can hear, the sound sounds like it's being pitched. And there was no processing on it, I don't think. It was just straight out the box. It's nice to have those sounds in there that just sit there sometimes, you know. And then there's the classic Heist kind of modulated Reese sound that comes in there. I've used that in a lot of records. And you can hear that there is definitely an envelope going on to kind of make that go up and down. Let's have a look at this. Okay, so there's only one plugin on it again, but inside the synth is where all the stuff's happening. So I'm using the Polysaw and the Scrapyard as wavetables. You can see the settings there if you want to kind of try and do it. And we are using voicing in this one, definitely, yeah, voicing. So if I take the voicing down, okay, that's one voice. If we put that up to 3, significant difference. I mean, voicing is essentially the stacking of what you've got right here. So if you've got 2 oscillators, you've actually got 6 now if you're using 3 voices. I hope that makes sense. You know, if you want to find out more about voicing, there's plenty of information on it, but definitely should be something that you're welding in your toolbox when it comes to audio, you know, and engineering. We're also, the filters are going to be quite important at this point, so let's have a look at those. If you take them off, there's the granite again before we've cut into it. I'm using a double notch filter on it first, which just gives it a bit of movement but doesn't actually cut into the sound that much. It's just kind of giving it an audio waft, if you will. I like that. And then the bandpass filter is what's giving us the actual movement. I'm using 2. I say I'm using 2. I'm using a tiny bit of a second mod on the cutoff for the first filter, which is on the double notch, and then on the second filter, which is the bandpass, I'm using a performer like that. And if I move this little guy here, that's going to give me a different sound here. Or you could use a combination of it. But for this, I think I was just using, was it that one? Okay, and that is pretty much, you know, why the sound sounds why it does. It's mainly down to these filters. You notice there's no movement at all without them. We've got a P shifter here. A bit like the clipping stage, what I did earlier, it's just a different algorithm. You've got several different ones you can choose from, but the parabolic shaper, just giving it bite and making it a bit more present. And then over here I've got on the effects section classic tube, which is being ragged, to be honest with you. I was going for that sound though. If you look, I am not distorting the output of massive. I am trying to get that bite and aggression. from that process there. And you can see I'm only using a small amount of dry wet, so you know, take of that what you will. That's really kind of nice to see though, that sometimes bashing something up and really taking the drive up does achieve what you want. And there's no effects or EQ on that, so that's pretty much the sound. Apart from that little plug-in, which was again that BBE. If we take that off, it's just a little bit bland. It's like it hasn't been seasoned properly or something. Great. So that's that final kind of bass there, completing the loop, if you will, so it can resolve and carry on again. So it's always a sort of process of finding resolves to make it loop, and then finding another resolve at the end of, say, here we go, 16 bars to make it loop again. And when it carries on past there, again, it's just copying and repeating. But there's enough parts there now for it to repeat for me. There's enough actually to keep me interested, to keep it bouncing from this synth to this synth. When I'm making a tune, I have to feel like I've put that effort in there, and I still do with looking at this now. Like, you know, this didn't just take me 5 minutes to get all those sounds to work, but it's quite a satisfying aspect when you do achieve it, and it makes you then have the opportunity to morph the sounds, which is what we're going to do now that we're going to start arranging it. But essentially, the core of the song is there now. You know, and at this point, I'm thinking, right, I need to expand this. So, what do I do to get out of the 16 bars and get into the next bit? Well, there's like almost like a mini bridge. Right there, you can hear the intro flavour just echoing in for a second. Okay, and there's also like a little kind of wind or something coming in behind it. So just trying to sort of fill the texture up, as I always do in my tracks, like as much as possible. Just to that bass. That is actually a variation, that bass. Can you see how we looked at this one, this Serum 1? Yeah. So over here I've got a copy of that, which we just heard right there, look. It's so subtle, but it is a slightly different sound with a almost gruffer feel to it. And I don't know why I didn't go for that one as the main one. Hell, at the time I was probably just writing and it just went in nicely and sat there as a variation. But yeah, it could have easily probably ended up being the main one if I'd thought about it more. But that's just, a track's never perfect, let's be honest. You know, we get it to the degree that we get it to that is a acceptable degree, and that's it. Like, you know, you can always come back and better your tunes later on as you get better. So that little sound's echoing back in from the intro, and then the vocals just coming and stepping in with another little incidental kind of, I don't know what you'd call that. It sounds like that's like a rise sound, but there's another one in there that I heard. Where is it? There it is. So lots of incidentals coming in. Yeah, I think I looped that, you know. I think I took, yes I did, I took a little sample and then basically just looped it for twice, and created this little kind of descending, quite rough really, but it sticks out quite nice as a, goes with the beat, you know, like it just, there's also like a little vinyl stop effect there that I've done, which sounds nice. So quite a few processes in that small, that's one bar there. You know, the detail you have to go to make tracks sound interesting is that much sometimes. It's just that marking point, 64 bars, is quite an important part, I guess. So that's the first 16 bars of the drop, pretty much all gone over, all the sounds, everything I can see. Basically then it's about, you know, expanding on that, and looking at it as an overview. These two that I'm hovering over at the moment, the ones we just covered, here we currently are. And what I've done is, expansion wise, I can see already I've got a different version of Massive coming in the middle of this 16 bars, and I've also got different Serums starting to blend in, and also different Massives here. But I'm also adding some extra drums. When I say drums, it's more of a percussive loop, That's actually a house loop that I've just chucked in there. Here's the processing I did. Pretty simple, just reductive EQing on the bottom end. So just cleaning that up, and then I pushed the mid a little bit there for some reason. And then yeah, just using a gate, which isn't really doing a lot really, very subtle. But add that into our loop. And it really pushes the groove on a little bit. And I'm literally adding it right over the top of everything that's already in there. It's just an accompany loop. I've kind of mixed it on purpose so that it's not that loud. You see how the level I've got it at. But when you take it out, it makes a big difference. It just gelled it along and made it go. Pleasing, sounded pleasing to me. So here, just where we stopped is where it's about to change a little bit. So if you listen to the first hits and then you listen to the part where it comes to in the middle of this. Slight change in sound there, just to kind of, I've almost made another overtone, I believe, in Massive. It wasn't anything major. You can hear it's the same sound. In fact, you can even see, look, Simpleton second, which is exactly the same as the other one. Let me get that down a little bit there. Okay, so that's the new one. Here's the old one. You can hear there's just an overtone. And what I think that is actually probably just something being increased a little bit on the wavetable. I can probably have a look, but might be difficult to see. Let's see if I can see it. So there's the original one. I can't see the difference, to be honest with you, at a glance, and I haven't really got time to go through it, but there will be a subtle difference that's changed to give me that overtone, basically. And that's what you look for. You know, you copy the whole thing down like I did there to another track, and then just start experimenting with it until you find the layer that progresses and gives you that expansion you're looking for on your riff. More incidental sounds coming in there. That one's a particular favourite. It's just like a one shot, like I mentioned, and it's only in there that one time. I think it sounded really good. Yeah, no actual processing. I didn't need to do anything. I just found the sound, and again, it just fitted in and moved. That transition, slight variation on the MIDI. So for me, the expansion is also about variation on MIDI notes as well as actual layers of the sound. You can see here on the one that we're just looking at, the Reese sort of effect. This is what I played down here, and this is what I'm playing up here. They're both completely different MIDIs. You know, whatever you can do to expand and keep the interest there is what I always kind of aim for myself, as well as just for the track to be finished. Another little incidental. Don't know what that was. Sounds like someone dying. Yeah, no real process on this, I don't think. Just a little bit of BBE. Is that on there? I don't think it even is. Hold on. There's something on it. Okay, yeah, a little bit of that bit crush effect I mentioned earlier. A little bit of high shelf. I mean, do they make that much difference? Yeah, I think they do. You know, we're just lifting the clarity a bit. And then lowering the quality of that clarity. It's just worked. Okay, so at this point, I am letting another sort of mini bridge come in here. Bigger than the one that there was just now. We had one that just literally had the flavour from the intro, but here I'm actually copying the synth back in, the pad, and you can see it. I'm actually just going to highlight it so you can see what I'm talking about, this part here. So this is almost like teasing the intro back in quickly. Notice there I took the bass out of the actual bass. I took the sub out and left the characteristical bass in, just to leave something to fill the space again. Okay, so then I'm moving on to the next repetition. What can I do to make it different this time? How am I going to keep it so it's not just the same? First thing I've done is add another drum loop in, this one here. And all that drove me to do that was that I managed to do it for this 16 bar interval here, so surely I could just again go and get another good one, and I did. Just went and found another kind of groovy house sort of loop, just to show you what it did sound like. Okay, so that's just sampling. I mean, I do it all the time, and time stretching. You know, look it up if you want to look into more stuff to do with that. So that is that change that's happened for this 16 bar amount. What I'm also doing is I'm changing my MIDI now for my notes. It starts traditionally the same as it would have done, but then I change it here. So there's a kind of cheeky different note coming in there. God knows what note it is. I just play the keys sometimes. I'm not necessarily wondering if the keys are in key. I just go by what I hear. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Too much theory and not enough practice. Classic, I've been like that. I've tried to look at how to actually you know, play the keys and stuff, and I found that just trying to feel for it yourself is the best way for me. Yeah, so different variation being marked by colours. That shows me at a glance that I can see that that's definitely different MIDI to this grey. So I'm always using the colours for recognition for that. So yeah, just a MIDI change basically. And extra percussive loop added in. And then more little sounds. Again, this one's only getting played once in the whole thing. Little kind of laser effect. Don't think there was any processing. No, nothing at all, just flat in there. Didn't even bother to roll off that low end. I left it in there. Remember, it's only going to be heard for that second. It's not like that low end's going to be constantly in there like it would be if it was on a hi-hat or something like that. So always bear that in mind. That's why we do it to things like hi-hats, and even my kick earlier you saw I took the low end off like that because it's a constant, whereas that wasn't. That's just going to be there for a second and it's going to be gone. More little sounds coming in. That is me again, just filling the space up. But yeah, pretty much that is the thing that changes here is I leave down the answer bass, so it's just doing this algorithm and not the original one that it's been following this whole time, which is this one. You can see now I'm starting to move into this one a little bit more, and then I'm actually going down into a different one here. So that is the progression for me we're going to hear now. Okay, so at this point I've used two different drum grooves to kind of move it along. And I'm thinking now, how can I expand it again? How can I change something? How can I just kind of keep it so it isn't the same as what I've already done? Something has got to be changed within the arrangement. And what I've done at a glance is I can see that I'm adding another drum groove separate. So I've used the mentality every time that it's worked, it'll work again if I can find something that I like. And that's what happened. I got 3 in the end, you can see here. This one is a copy later on, but yeah, this one. And notice I've left in the kick. I've left the kick in because it just worked with that extra kick. And you know, 9 times out of 10, whenever I bring a loop in, that doesn't happen. But with this one, it just seemed to be like it was meant to happen. And by taking it away, I actually lost the sort of the feel that I got from it when I just heard it. If I take it away, you can see what I mean. It just feels like, and if I try and EQ the kick away, like it feels like it needs it. You see what I mean? Like I've taken it away there. But I liked the extra push, so I left it in there, and just you can see the small amount of EQing I did do. I just reduced a little bit of the mids, just subtly sort of taking that down a little bit, but nothing else. That was the sort of final one for me, because I only needed one more, and then I was going to be getting back in on the, you know, the intro stuff coming back in. The other thing I changed in this was the combination of the, the different serums. You can see I've started, this whole time we've actually were just following this first serum, and as time goes on we actually start to use less of that, and to expand and make it interesting, I've used different serum copies to create different variations. So if you ever listen to those. Let's just get them on their own without the beat so you can really see what I'm talking about. So there's the original one, then we've got this one, and then we've got this one. So that combination hasn't been heard yet in the arrangement. For me, that's nice. That's what I'm looking for. That is satisfaction and approval to kind of say, right, well, you've managed to do that. Keep it going, and then use that as a different part to make it evolve. So you can just move on. Because a lot of the time, it's like anything will do as long as it just makes the track, as long as it works and it makes it move on. That's what you're looking for. Again, building up here a little bit with the riser sound that we've been using this whole time. Actually, it's been used each time at the end. You could variate that, but I left that as it was. I liked it, and I didn't feel it was too repetitious being in the way it is in the arrangement. What I've done here is I've muted out the pad. This is where the pad came in earlier on as our bridge. And the reason I've done that is because I'm actually going to be hearing the pad a load in a minute. So I thought I'd just mute that out and just have the riser sound coming in, with the basses just rolling as they are. And then a little transition effect at the end, which sounds like it's got a little bit of, it's got a bit of ping pong delay. We looked at that earlier. I believe that the only thing that's probably changed here is the feedback. But yeah, that just gave that little sound, that little bit of, end, if you like, because without it, it just stopped dead. So I wanted that to just have a tail. Ping pong's really good for that. And yeah, now you can hear that the intro is coming in there over the top of the bass, a bit like what happened previously here in the bridge at sort of 72 to 80 is now happening doubled. And what I've done is I've basically just copied the intro over. So if we zoom out, you can see that here's the intro here, and here's what we're currently at. We are using this section of the intro, I believe, just this part, this sort of like 16 bar block, and that is literally just here with the drums and bass running alongside it. So that's literally just bridging the intro back into the track itself at this point. And what I do is I take it down so there's actually no beats again. So what's essentially just happening here is what happened on the intro. Like I said, I literally chopped it and just took the first 16 bar part off the intro, and now that allows us to get back in. That allows us to get back into the drop as it was and for the track to play out. What I'm just going to talk about is something I mentioned earlier, which was the side chaining. What I'm doing is I'm using that side kick that hasn't got any output to actually trigger this compressor. So every time that the kick gets played, which if we activate the kick, you can see that it's just ducking it out just so that the kick kind of exists. And it works really well just to kind of take out any fight that you might get in your subs. That's just on one of the subs. I've got it on others. But yeah, I just wanted to, basically just cover that it is control. It's controlling levels and controlling the existence of two things for me on the low end there. And the other thing we need to look at is the final bus, I think. Okay, so yeah, on the master bus, it always varies what I'm actually using. For instance, you can see that I did have ozone actually on there, but I didn't use it in the end. Ozone had several things on it. Let's have a look. So I was using vintage coin. I tried all this stuff out, but in the end I went with my own chain, and you should definitely use ozone as inspiration to go and make your own chains. You know, and there's never a rule about what you should and shouldn't put on something. You know, just experiment with it and find what works for you. And that's another, that takes me back to what I was saying earlier. If you keep doing the same thing, if you keep using ozone constantly, it's just not kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not exciting enough for me sometimes to just stay safe. I like to try and experiment a little bit and be spontaneous and work out new things. Hell, that's how I found about ozone in the first place. So what have we got going on here? Let's turn these guys off. We've got the virtual mix rack doing the revival. This plug-in, I can't really tell you what it does. It's just literally an under the hood situation here. You can't go and fiddle with it. You've just got two dials, shimmer and thickness. I'm using 8 on the shimmer, and the thickness I'm using very small amounts, about 1.2. I think it was. I don't want to adjust it in case I lose the setting, but yeah, that does this. So let's just turn that off. Okay, so instant lift. Just really nice and subtle. Use it subtle. Remember, this is on the master bus. You don't want to be doing too many things to the master bus over a large amount. If you need to do that, you need to go back into the mix. Then I'm using the Slate Digital, FGX, which is by the same company. And I'm only using the FG level part for the low transient punch. Have a look into this when I engage this. Okay, it's a little bit lighter without it. And this was definitely something I just experimented with, just what I was telling you about. Like, you know, I'd never used it before, and I just started twiddling a few things and thought, oh, low punch, transient, what will that sound like? And it just, yeah, it just worked for me. And there was no actual theory about what that low transient was, whereabouts it was, or anything like that. It just worked. Now you might notice that the snare, now I've turned the mastering chain off, or part of it, you haven't got the last bit yet, which is the limiter, and that's the important part. The snare sounds like it's too loud. That's totally kind of fine, because I actually kind of brought down this and then put the limiter on. And then made sure that it was all still working all right when I did that. You know, I probably would have been working with this track quite loud, and everything would have been up in the mix. And then putting a limiter on, which would allow me to bring everything down in the mix, and then essentially get the limiter doing the pushing rather than the whole mix doing the pushing. It also helps with your gain staging on your plugins and things like that. So that's something I'll always do at some point in the track. I can't really tell you when. Sometimes it's right at the start with the drum, sometimes it's at the end. Sometimes I don't even do it at all. It just shows the randomization on master bus kind of theory, and for me that's just that, it's random. So yeah, FGX explained, and then the final thing then is just the FabFilter Pro L. And because the mix is pretty kind of tidy and well, all the sounds are kind of levels are good, I haven't had to really limit it too much at all. Anyone that's got the FabFilter will know it's a pretty simple. There's actually a version 2 out now that I've also got, but I love this first version. It's so simple. Okay, that's with it. That's without it. I mean, it's night and day. And you can see here, this little guy going down here, this is where you would clip, okay, when you think about it. This red meter is kind of the limiter snapping in and saying, no, you're not clipping. And whatever you set it to, which in my case, I've set it to the output of minus 0.3, that means that your master output won't clip. So you see, look, it was clipping. You can clearly see it's red there. If I just click on that and reset it now. Okay, so, and let's just experiment. Was that clipping before the limiter was put on? Almost. See, this is what I mean. I've brought down the mix so it's just not clipping, and then I've gone and used the limiter to achieve that extra clip that I was getting when it was all turned up loud. without even clipping still, you know. That's how I do it. I ended up pushing it 11.6, but that's not 11.6 of gain. Don't think of it like that. I guess it is. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. In this case, it actually is. When I'm looking at the output, it's saying -11. So sometimes that doesn't say that though. So don't be thinking that that is just the way it is all the time. It depends how you're using it. You know, if you went over the top with this, I just want to show you, you're not actually getting any more loudness. You're just getting, you know, it just doesn't sonically sound good. So I think it's important to experiment where you can go with a limiter and get familiar with it, because you'll get to a certain point, there will be no more loudness gained. In this case, this is where I settled for. But that's everything. That's all of the plugins and everything explained that do anything on the master bus. Okay, so that's the track done. Yeah, Misery Guts will be out on Iacon, my debut album. I've never done an album before, so that's out in May. Don't forget I'm available for one-to-one tuition. Hit me up, heist121s@gmail.com. I want to thank Computer Music for coming over today. Absolute legends, loved it. Catch you next time.